concentration of nitrous oxide is at that interface. And that information is transmitted to brain part B, and technology replicates exactly that nitrous oxide concentration. So whatever physical effect there is, just replicate that. I'm just using sensory and motor axon signals for simplicity. Some people have just claimed that they don't think it's technologically possible to do this, period, even with just the neurons. And I don't share that view. Ultimately, I don't think it matters. But think of it this way. I mean, the human race has been in the technology biz for a couple thousand years, and already we've gone from throwing sticks at monkeys to video conference chatting on laptop computers. And that's a lot of advancement. I mean, imagine just trying to explain video teleconferencing on your laptop computer to Descartes, right? It would take a lot of work. I mean, think about all the different things. Even just look at the screen, the fact that you've got a screen here that's changing colors, and what you'd have to try to explain to him to explain how that works. I mean, it's just magic to someone just 300 years ago, okay? It's probably impossible to explain it to Aristotle, right? The very terms of any of this stuff is probably beyond him. Well, if I start thinking about what the human race is going to be capable of in 10,000 years from now, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 800 million years, this isn't implausible. 800 million years from now, if humans aren't taking brains out of bodies, it's just because we don't want to, not because we can't. So that's my thought on that. Okay. Next. Time travel. Come on. That's just crazy. Well, I have two responses to this. First, if the subject is the brain, then presumably this is an ontological fact whose truth does not depend on the impossibility of time travel. It would be a strange sort of ontological fact that could switch back and forth between being true and false as a function of some unrelated nomic constraint. This would be like a situation in which if the speed of light were 4 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, then type identity is true of mind and brain. But if it's 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, then token identity is true. If one's ontology is subject to this sort of reliance, then one should re-examine one's ontology. The second response, which is actually the better response, is that, look, time travel is only serving a rhetorical function in this thought experiment. It's allowing me to construct a scenario in which the consequences of the Kantian materialist and the Cartesian materialist and the Kantian approaches can be made more unmistakably evident. But the motivations on both sides remain, even in the original Dennett case without time travel. So if you really don't like the idea of sending information back in time, then just focus on the spatial aspects of the situation. It's just a rhetorical point. I don't really think any of the Group A objections are interesting because they're all just sort of like technological questions about rhetorical devices. They don't really get at the philosophical issues, I don't think. So let's move on to Group B objections. 4. Look, Rick, there is no such thing as a subject, so the entire enterprise of this paper is pointless. Asking where the subject is like asking where the Easter Bunny is. The answer is nowhere. Well, I have two responses to this. The first and easiest, and this is not the response I'm actually going to make, is just to claim that I'm only addressing people who think that there is a subject here, or there is a topic worth investigating here, and that the notion of a subjective experience is a kosher one. I don't mean to engage this sort of person. So if this is your objection, then you shouldn't have come to my talk. That's not the response I want to make. The response I feel better about making, even though it's still not definitive, is this. It's not clear what the difference is between the person who articulates this objection and myself, right? We're both denying that there is a thing that is the self. Okay, so we're both non-Cartesian. Okay, we're both agreeing that it seems like there is a thing. Okay, though I describe the self, the subject, as real but abstract, while this objector is deriding it as mere illusion. Aside from the positive and negative spins, though, without further elaboration, I'm not sure what the difference between the views is, so I propose to just punt on this one. Final objection. The thought experiment requires that the timing of the input and output of the brain parts in the body remain intact. This is done by, in effect, establishing an abstract processing time and syncing the data inputs and outputs to each brain part in the body with this same abstract processing time. For example, suppose that RIP3K lives for 1 year. Then each brain part will have a 1-year input sequence and produce a 1-year output sequence. And, further example, when RIP3K sees an apple exactly 20,000 seconds after he is brought online, then each of the brain parts will be doing its apple processing exactly 20,000 seconds after that brain part begins processing input. In short, there is a well-defined, though abstract, temporal sequence, call it processing time, that RIP3K and his brain are all synced to. In the normal case, of course, this syncing is accomplished by the fact that all the brain parts in the body are run in parallel at the same time. All the thought experiment has done is use buffers to maintain the coherence of processing time through temporal displacement. Given this, what RIP is accurately reporting on is admittedly not an actual temporal sequence of neural events, but a well-defined sequence of neural events in abstract processing time. And in fact, the flashes were all processed at an earlier phase of processing time than the bark. Now for my response. First, the fact that all the segments of the brain and body have to be temporally coordinated in this manner is an important fact that I didn't bring attention to. And it does entail that while the processing does not need to be well ordered in real time, it does need to be coordinated in abstract time. But what conclusions should we draw from this? The suggestion is that if the self is the brain, then RIP's temporal self-ascriptions are not wildly false. They're not ill-defined, like I suggested they were. They are correct self-ascriptions of temporal relations among neural processing events in an abstract processing time. I'm not going to quibble with this tactic, but rather simply point out that if it's a victory, it's a hollow one. If there was a motivation for the brain as the subject view, it was that it saved one from having to agree with Kant that the subject is an abstract formal entity. On the current proposal, though, the subject is an abstract formal entity. But in this case, it's even worse. It's not just as bad or just as unpalatable if you don't like abstractions. It's a worse abstraction because it's an abstraction that isn't along any sort of content lines. If the subject is anything, the subject is the grasper of contents. So making the subject abstract grasper of contents at least makes some more sense than being in neural processing and abstract processing time. Okay, so much for the objections. Now for a few very brief closing thoughts. In this paper, I've tried to make the case that while the brain is crucial for the mind and is crucial for the subject, it is crucial not because it is identical to the subject, but because the brain does the information processing that constitutes the grasping of representational contents that in turn determine the subject. If you destroy the brain, then you destroy the subject, not because the brain is the subject, but because the brain's representational capacities define the subject. What I have not done, though, is to place the point of view under similar pressure. Doing so would involve tracing out the consequences for subjectivity of a scattered or incoherent point of view. One might imagine in this vein a brain that sees what's happening at the Getty Museum, hears what is happening at Times Square, controls the left leg of Barry Bonds and the temperature of the space shuttle, but without any sensory feedback about the things it's controlling. I think that, when followed out carefully, such a situation is not one that could support anything recognizable as a subject, a conclusion that Kant would undoubtedly endorse. But this side of the investigation will have to wait for another day. Thank you.